Thank you so much for having the patience to have me continue to speak in my mother tongue of English. I sometimes joke that I look a little bit Mexican, a little bit Spanish, but I'm actually Greek, so I will continue to practice. But again, thank you so much for having me. I just arrived a few hours ago, and I'm so impressed by the level of commitment, the diversity of voices, the diversity of perspectives and priorities that Gobierno and all of the partners in the room have displayed so far. So I'm going to focus on the LGBTQ business case and the return on investment for the community. But before I start with these specifics, I want to share a small analogy for how I view diversity and inclusion in the context of business. If I ask the room to picture, or if you know the population I'm talking about, there was a population that was perceived to be sinful, was perceived to have the mark of the devil, was perceived to be so problematic that during the Spanish Inquisition they were ostracized. And this is a population that makes up roughly 10% of the entire world. And so who am I speaking about? You know this one, yes, the left hand analogy. Sometimes when you share this, people think, oh, perhaps it's the Jewish population, perhaps it's the LGBT population. In this case, it's individuals who use their left hand, primarily. So I, as someone who am not very coordinated with my left hand, recognizing this is an imperfect analogy, we're often compelled to make the business case. But if you have use of your left hand, do you think to yourself, what's the real value of my left hand? It really needs to show me how important it is. No, you just go ahead and type. You take for granted that you can use all of your faculties. And, you know, when we talk about diversity and inclusion within the workplace, that's exactly what we're talking about. Because my left hand is here whether I use it to its full capacity or not, if I'm able to. And the same thing as we talk about individuals who are LGBT. They make up a certain percentage of nearly every single workplace. And so while I'm going to make a proactive business case for inclusion, I also want us to remember that to deny the existence of the LGBT population is to lose a significant part of your opportunity and faculties. So with that, this is my subtle signal for the slide. So to tell you just a little bit about the organization I represent, the Human Rights Campaign started in the United States. It's currently the world's largest civil rights organization devoted to LGBTQ equality. Something interesting about the name is that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the organization was being built, there was a recognition that people could not freely talk about a gay rights organization. They could not receive an envelope in the mail from a gay rights organization or a transgender rights organization. And so the name Human Rights Campaign actually comes from an era of not wanting to call out LGBT specifically. And here we are decades later, and you know, someone who's very present in my mind, being your northern neighbor, we had Hillary Clinton in Geneva talking about LGBT rights as human rights. And so in many ways, we've come full circle. The work that we do, the program that I direct, is focused on the workplace. And so, go a little bit quickly through some of these. To let you know where we are today, we have been here in Mexico several times, thanks to the generosity and the hosting of the U.S. Embassy, the American Chambers of Commerce, and other partners on the ground here. And every year we publish a huge report called the Corporate Equality Index that measures how major corporations, many of which are multinational, Accenture, Dow, go on down the list of businesses that are here, how they treat their LGBT employees. Now, it's not a ranking of how you feel as an LGBT employee within the company. It's an objective rating of policies, benefits, and practices. And so a few years ago, we told all of our multinational businesses that in order to earn that 100%, the score that they have had to date, if they operate globally, they must have LGBT protections everywhere that they do business. And so it was last fall that we wanted to cap off several years of work here in Mexico. We were graciously hosted by Dow, by our friends at Pride Connection and the US Embassy as partners to launch our first international corporate equality index. And it's important to note that this conversation is not happening just in the United States, just with our neighbors in Mexico, just in Argentina, as everyone wants to talk about Argentinians going well ahead on LGBT rights. This is a global conversation. Quite literally, last January at the World Economic Forum, frankly, not a forum known to be especially liberal or especially progressive, there was a private roundtable with Vice President Joe Biden and executives from Coca-Cola, from Alcoa, from some of the largest engines of the global economy, talking specifically about LGBT inclusion. Not inclusion generally, LGBT inclusion. I have counterparts from Hong Kong to Australia to here in Mexico that are devoted to issues of workplace inclusion. And so it's not a stretch to say that any business or public entity that's not talking about LGBT inclusion is probably already behind. And so it's forums like this where we can be more proactive and really look at what it takes to build an internal case for LGBT equality. The next. So just again to situate our partnership here, there's Fernando Velasquez and Paco Robledo, our incredible partners here. I first met Fernando over 5 years ago when he was at American Express. And what was so powerful about that first meeting is that Fernando had spearheaded the first LGBT and ally network group at American Express. And while his counterparts in New York, the counterparts that I had been working with for several years, had long enjoyed having the official support of the company for an LGBT network, this was brand new. And through our partnership and through our dialogue, we were able to grow the level of awareness. Not that it's Fernando saying this is important, it's Deena saying it's important. It's the full breadth and context of all of the multinationals right now that have prioritized LGBT equality. And so with the leadership of other organizations that have stepped in the last few years, I'm looking at the Pride Connection table here. Pride Connection launched its inaugural summit this past spring in this room with over 200 participants, talking about everything from national perspectives on transphobia, homophobia, and then also the unique business proposition that is LGBT inclusion. And so this leads up to what was an exciting announcement earlier this morning. We'll go to the next slide. We at the Human Rights Campaign have found the most successful formula to impact the everyday lives of LGBT people and their allies, their friends, is to partner up with people on the ground, to use and leverage the leadership of the US Embassy, of organizations like Gobierno, of experts in the field like Fernando and Francisco. And so this morning we announced HRC Equidad MX, and this is going to be a concerted effort to complement the incredible work and networking already happening across Pride Connection and some of the other entities here in Mexico. What happened last fall when we launched the Corporate Equality Index, and frankly during almost every conversation I've had in Mexico over the years, is this is not a US phenomenon. Mexican businesses are saying, yes, we can be committed to that, but we need to have some partnership. We need to build the business case internally and actually learn from some of our multinational counterparts. And so that's why we're so excited to launch this. There'll be more to come, and I know that there's a printout of a fuller description of the project. But before we, Before we get too deep into this, I want to tell you about the experience within the United States, because it was not all sunshine and roses, as they say. It was not all easy. In 2002, that's not very long ago at all, LGBT people in the United States faced tremendous barriers to equality. There was not a single federal law that enumerated sexual orientation and gender identity protections. Not even hate crimes bills had been passed yet. Let's go to the next. And so it was in this environment, an environment in which, and this is particularly key, less relevant here in Mexico, but certainly relevant to our counterparts in places like Singapore. In the United States in 2002, gay people could face prosecution under the United States' sodomy statutes. And that Supreme Court case was not resolved until 2003. So it was in this legal environment that advocates came together and said, you know, we will continue to advocate as the Human Rights Campaign for legal change, but we can't wait for legal change. And that's really where this notion of a business case for LGBT inclusion developed. And why is that so unique when you think about, at least within the United States and in many other countries, what is so unique about it? Well, even though there's still a lot of work to be done, in the United States, you do have legal protections against discrimination on the basis of race, on the basis of disability, on the basis of religion. And so if you are doing that work, if you are trying to promote inclusion, you have both a business case, but you also have a legal case. In the case of the LGBT community, there's very thin legal case. Even today, there's still not a federal statute protecting the LGBT community from employment discrimination. So in that regard, we actually are behind many other countries. The good news is, we were able to capitalize on this idea that you could transform the American workplace company by company, in addition to working with Congress, in addition to working with the President. And what I want to walk us through are a couple of valuable tenets that we learned along the way that I hope can be transferable here. Number one, I want to outline these as operating assumptions, because if any of these are still meeting challenges, that should be resolved before you further develop a case, and we can be talking about gender equality, disability, and a range of issues. But number one, LGBTQ people and our allies live and work nearly everywhere. Perhaps you recall there have even been heads of state around the world that have declared there are no gay people in our country. That sounds ridiculous, right? And yet, I can tell you, company after company, people will still say, you know, I don't think we have anybody who's transgender here. I think I would know. Or I don't think we have anybody on my team that's gay. I think I would know. The point being, it's an invisible form of diversity. No one can take a photograph of a room and be able to tell this person is lesbian, this person is transgender. And so, if fundamentally your first challenge is convincing someone that they may in fact have LGBT people there, I would say pay attention to that. That really is step one. And that's where the data of some of our partners on the ground here can help. The second tenet, and this was also key and in many ways new for any civil rights group, this notion that the private sector, irrespective of what's happening in terms of the law, will respond to market demands and norms. So this is how you can have an incredible day in the United States, for example, where you have politicians continuing to call for the ostracization of the LGBT community, and yet you also have a majority of major corporations investing in LGBT inclusion, because that's what the market demands. So in that regard, you can really capitalize on all that the private sector has to offer in parallel to what is happening politically and even to some degree socially. We also banked on the idea that competition will drive change. When I start to talk about the results, people often want to attribute the growth in LGBT inclusion across corporations to changes in social attitudes, to a loosening up of gender attitudes. And while all of that is helpful context, if I had to give you one reason for the evolution of LGBT inclusion, it would be one word: competition. that as soon as one airline had a top score in the Corporate Equality Index, all of the other airlines wanted to follow. As soon as one consulting company had a top score, all of them wanted to follow. And so that is a strategy that, frankly, any demographic group can capitalize on. Lastly, it's okay. Lastly, I think I touched on this, but no business wants to simply be at a legal standard. No business says, our innovation, well, we follow the law. Businesses are ahead of the law. And with the norms changing, both at the level of, for example, the United Nations having some historic LGBT meetings this week, to changes in nation states law, businesses need to be ready for that. They don't need to be catching up. They don't need to be adjusting their human resources systems months after a law has changed. So what we did as an organization is look at what I would call the anatomy of a successful business. So before you even talk about this through the lens of LGBT inclusion, what are some of the components that virtually every successful business has? Number one, a mission statement. There's not a single successful business that doesn't have its own creeds, its own mission, both in terms of products, services, etc., but also its internal mission with respect to how employees are treated. You'll often see that broken down into a non-discrimination policy or a code of conduct. And that can include everything from prohibitions against child labor in the supply chain to protection of various classes of people. But fundamentally, that mission statement and that alignment is the most foundational step to LGBT inclusion. Number two, a robust talent recruitment and retention effort. Occasionally we still see, usually smaller businesses saying, well, I wouldn't necessarily need gay employees, they can go elsewhere. Or I don't necessarily need to be selling my products to gay people, they can go elsewhere. That's really on this side of the bell curve, that's the outlier. Most businesses understand that talent comes in all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, orientations, and so forth. One of the industries that grew rapidly, well before any legal mandates, 15 years ago, in addition to the obvious ones, the tech sector and the banking sector, it was aerospace and defense that grew rapidly. That's probably not where one's mind goes when you picture an LGBT inclusive business. Several years ago, we awarded Boeing Corporation, the huge international aerospace and defense firm, the huge aerospace and defense firm Boeing Corporation, an award for how they globalized their transgender inclusion program. Now, why would a Boeing devote resources, time, staff, and energy to a transgender inclusion program? Well, fundamentally, it's the right thing to do, but also, and particularly important to them, when you are quite literally recruiting rocket scientists, if that rocket scientist happens to be transgender, you do not want to lose them to Raytheon or Honeywell or any other competitor. And so that level of competition for talent has driven change across the board. I had mentioned, sometimes small businesses saying, well, we don't necessarily need that market. Well, the anatomy of any successful business will include market access. Whether you're a B2B, a business to business, looking for clients, whether you are Marriott Hotels, looking for more guests, you need that level of market access. Lastly, and related to the talent recruitment and retention, you have productivity and innovation. Every business wants people to be walking in the door, engaged with their employer, not thinking about wanting to leave in 6 months, thinking creatively about a project. Whether that project is the packaging of the latest food or beverage that they're going to put out, or whether that product is in fact something in the aerospace and defense world. Businesses want their employees to not just feel accepted in the workplace, but to feel valued enough that they are contributing at a level that's beyond just the bare minimum, beyond the 9 to 5. And lastly, all businesses want and need an ease of investment and compatibility. And so why would this be important in the LGBT context? Because today, increasingly, businesses that have not incorporated LGBT inclusion in their business model, that's the equivalent of working on technology that was phased out 10 years ago. So the next time that a business is approached for a merger, an acquisition, or growth in another country, why would you want your systems out of alignment? And so what we're finding, particularly here in Mexico, with a lot of the back and forth with US companies, is that the level of LGBT inclusion has been so high, it's almost taken for granted. Until you come to Mexico and the new subsidiary is no longer in alignment. They've never heard of domestic partner benefits. They've never heard of the notion of LGBT protections in the workplace. And that right there is as much of a mismatch as if they were using, Word Perfect or some old program that no one uses anymore. So we'll go to the next one. Sorry about this. Font keeps changing. And so how do we do this then and draw it out to create a true business case for LGBT inclusion? Number one, in terms of the mission, I've never seen a mission statement from a business that says, we'll take 80% of the talent pool, or we'll take 75% of the talent pool, or everyone is welcome to work here, but we only want you to bring 60% of who you are to your own job. So businesses, when they align their mission, whether it's to deliver innovative products, to reach their full potential in terms of food, beverage, manufacturing, all of that necessitates explicit LGBT inclusion. And that was the case that we made within the United States that continues to grow across multinationals. The talent imperative, I think we're bought onto that. But I'll give you an example that's not LGBT, but comes from PepsiCo, a major food and beverage company we all know. So PepsiCo has long supported various employee network groups. And one of the ways that they created a sense of community and aligned it with a business objective was several years ago they had a contest across their affinity groups. And each affinity group was tasked with coming up with a new campaign or a new product. And so it was the Latina group in the United States that came up with a new guacamole flavored chip, and it became the best-selling new product that year. And so why is that such an important example? Because when people are told, you don't just have a seat at the table, I want you to bring your full self to the table, I want you to bring your unique insights to the table, then people can relate creatively to their work and say, you know what? When I look around my community, and I'm starting to see this more again stateside, Gatorade, for example, subsidiary of PepsiCo, is starting to have more and more products that reflect tastes coming from Mexico. So they currently have a Gatorade that's cucumber and pepper flavored. It's actually delicious. But if you had a round table of white American business executives debating whether or not they thought that was going to be successful, what do you think you would have gotten? But when you actually invite diversity to the table, and when you foster a sense of inclusion, you then start to get these more innovative and profitable products. And that was something, again, we saw over and over again with the LGBT community. So market access, that story was quite similar. We also know through years of research on the LGBT community with respect to travel and tourism, that the LGBT community, more than others, will research brands. They will decide whether or not they're loyal to a brand based on knowing something like the Corporate Equality Index score. And even more than that, and more impressive to businesses, is that many LGBT people will switch products, even if it's a little bit more expensive, if it's a brand that respects and honors the community. And more and more the evidence we're seeing from millennials, from broader swaths, or broader demographic groups, is that those people who are going to be buying products tomorrow and 5 and 10 years from now, they want that level of connectivity to a brand. They want to feel that the brand is authentic. And so long gone are the days where a business could simply wave a rainbow flag and hope that that said enough about their commitment. They actually need to back it up with a commitment to their own workforce. Lastly, the ease of investment compatibility. I used some examples going from the United States to Mexico. I'm sure you all have seen some of the tension in the United States right now in states like North Carolina. North Carolina with its anti-LGBT bill on the books and the huge reaction from the business community. My team works behind the scenes to get businesses to speak out on bills like that. And what's the biggest driver for a business? In addition to being the right thing to do, it's that they want an ease of mobility and an ease of investment. Wells Fargo and Bank of America are two of the largest employers in North Carolina. They've spoken out against the bill. If I'm the CEO of one of those companies and I see this bill come to fruition, I'm not only thinking, how does this impact LGBT workers in North Carolina? I'm thinking, hey, I have a straight executive who happens to have a transgender child or happens to have a gay child, and they're based in California, and I was counting on moving them to North Carolina to oversee a new operation. Well, now that family is probably going to make a different decision. And so that's really where I can see increasing change with respect to the private sector weighing in on public policy. They're not doing this in the context of religion, social issues, politics. They're doing it in the context of how anti-LGBT efforts can disrupt their business. And that's really why lawmakers have been listening more and more. And this didn't happen overnight. I wanted to show you a few more hallmarks or evidence of growth over the years and how it is that this whole framework, the business case that we built, has now manifested in true results across major businesses. So the graph that you're looking at right now shows the evolution of businesses that have adopted specific protections on the basis of sexual orientation. So don't worry about the exact numbers. I can just tell you that at this moment in time, roughly 9 out of 10 of the major businesses that we work with, including about half of them are multinational, have specific protections in place for the gay, lesbian, bisexual community. Do the next slide on gender identity. Gender identity, this is probably the most incredible graphic of change. This little purple bar that you can barely see in 2002 when we started this work, 3% of the Fortune 500, 5% of all the businesses we worked with had gender identity protections. In other words, the conversation about transgender equality was next to nothing. And you can see that today, 87% of the businesses in the Corporate Equality Index have gender identity protections. That has been steadily increasing behind the scenes, well before Orange is the New Black or Caitlyn Jenner and these pop culture phenomena. Because again, when we meet with businesses, the question is, why are we doing this? Is it going to cost us money? Who else is doing this? All of the answers to those questions point to, let's go ahead and get this done. Go to the next one. In addition, I just want to highlight the extent to which businesses have been responsive to what stateside has been the Corporate Equality Index, but it's an evaluation of their treatment of LGBT employees. And so it's rare for a business to raise their hand and say, yes, I want a civil rights group to audit my policies and my practices. That sounds actually pretty absurd. And yet, because this really was premised on the notion that we as an organization want to work with you, we will build a business case with you, and then we will also make these results transparent so that you can have a leg up against competitors. That's what appealed to businesses. And through that strategy, you'll rarely see us. We don't do negative press. We don't protest. We don't call for boycotts. We offer support and assistance to any mid or large-sized business that wants to work with us. Press it again. So, the transformational change that's happened, and this really speaks to some of the return on investment. The return on investment when it comes to LGBT inclusion, there are some hard and fast data points that we can use, but there are other things that can't be predicted by one formula. Here's an example. Starbucks, one of the most popular brands, growing brands in the entire world. Starbucks became one of the faces in the fight for marriage equality within the United States. And at the shareholders meeting, Howard Schultz, the CEO, was challenged face-to-face by a woman named Maggie Gallagher, who had spent a lot of her life fighting against marriage equality. She feels that gay people should not have the right to get married. And when she challenged him in front of his shareholders, what did he say? He said that the company's support of marriage equality was simply consistent with the heritage and the tradition of the company as a whole. And then he pointed to the diversity of their own workforce. So what is so unique about that? Did he talk about religion? No. Did he mention any particular political persuasion? No. Was he talking about moral beliefs? Somewhat, maybe it was the right thing to do. What he was doing is saying, as a steward of this company, I recognize that I have LGBT employees and allied employees across my entire workforce, and therefore it's only my duty and it only makes sense for me to stand up for what's right here. And that's really the level of publicity, public relations, earned media that Howard Schultz and Starbucks got from that. There's not a formula that could have predicted it, nor is there a PR firm that could have done that on their own. And that's what, when we talk about authentic leadership from businesses, these are the kinds of positive results that we see over and over and over. On the right hand of the screen, I just want to show something else. During the Sochi Olympics, after Russia passed anti-gay propaganda law, some in the community, in the global community, were calling for boycotts of the Olympics. They were calling for the sponsors of the Olympics, like Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble, to drop their sponsorship. And, you know, debatably, that was not a path that they felt they could pursue. But during the Olympics, the first Olympics under this new anti-gay propaganda law, what did Coca-Cola do? They released a global ad that featured gay couples. It featured very common American folk songs, but sung in Spanish, nationalistic songs sung in Spanish. And I happened to be in Mexico when it was played, and I heard two American gentlemen at a bar say, "Oh, that's that controversial ad." And I had my ear up because I was curious if they would say it's because there were gay people. I said, no, that's that controversial ad. You know, they were singing in Spanish. They didn't sing it in English. So that was a way that Coca-Cola said, here's our sphere of influence. We are the most recognized brand in the world. And we are going to use that to promote equality. And so as we talk today and reflect today, what is the return on investment? There are some data points we can give you, but increasingly you throw a stone and you'll hit an example of a major multinational business that has been strengthened by embracing LGBT inclusion. Next. So I promised you a little bit of data, and I'll tell you that, and I'm happy to circulate more of this. And I'm going to tell you the United States number only because the number is not as precise through parts of Latin America, but that's changing. But in the United States right now, the LGBT consumer market as a whole, it's not to say that everyone's wealthy, but as a whole, has an estimated buying power of $900 billion US. That's a number that has been steadily rising and has been measured by a globally reputable consumer marketing firm called Witted Communications. And so you could certainly bet that, you know, when there's a skeptical leader in a business wondering if they should invest in this, they hear that number and they say, wow. And then you couple it with, and this is a very knowledgeable consumer market. In other words, they're not just going to spend this money because you had one flashy ad or one sort of superficial show of support. The second is that, and this is something that we look forward to in our Equidad partnership, we found within the United States that you can measure turnover costs and you can measure a loss of productivity estimated to be about 30% when people feel that they need to be in the closet or when people are generally facing an unwelcoming work environment for being LGBT. Lastly, in terms of the return on investment, I had talked about this some, but you know, businesses want to alleviate headaches. They want their acquisitions, their mergers to be as smooth as possible, whether we're talking about their software systems or whether we're talking about their HR policies. And so more and more, part of that return on investment is essentially front-loading some cost savings. As businesses merge across the globe, part of the conversation is, well, wait a minute, business A always had LGBT inclusive policies and now business B doesn't. And you can bet that that's not at the top of people's lists of things that they want to worry about when they're worried about taxes and mergers and everything else. And so part of that return on investment is actually just looking around and saying, wow, all signs point to go here. All signs point to the fact that world leaders, thought leaders, corporate leaders, and increasingly the data from millennials and younger people are showing that this is the wave of now, and it is the wave of tomorrow. And so any business, any sector that continues to hold out is going to be caught flat-footed. And so with that, I will wind down. I understand we have a bit of time for questions, or not. I'm looking at Fernando. But thank you again for hosting me, and I hope that I can have many more one-on-one conversations later today.
Muchísimas gracias a Deena, Fidas por esta conferencia. Y bueno, vamos a abrir un espacio para un par de preguntas y le voy a dar a Deena el aparato, pero si gustan levantar la mano quien quiera, tenga alguna pregunta. Acá tenemos una, tenemos dos preguntas. ¿Estaría la traducción, interpretación? ¿Lista? Ok, listo. Por favor, de este lado, la pregunta, sí. ¿Me ayudan con el micrófono, por favor, Remington?
Gracias. Buenas tardes, Deena. Soy Víctor García. Yo solamente saber cómo midieron ese retorno de inversión y cuánto tiempo y porcentaje retornó dicha inversión.
A ver, repite la pregunta, por favor.
Ok. ¿En cuánto tiempo y en qué porcentaje retornó la inversión en el trabajo que hicieron ustedes en esas transnacionales?
Well, so it's a really good question because it depends on how you're measuring the return on investment. Typically within a year or two, businesses will, from corporate leadership to also more mid-level, those that are spearheading employee network groups, will talk about the positive changes that have resulted in becoming more LGBT inclusive. Part of what I also look at, the fact that businesses that didn't exist a decade ago continue to approach us now. So Twitter, LinkedIn, sort of the Silicon Valley businesses that are presumed to be very progressive and forward-looking see a value in actually investing and systematizing LGBT inclusion. Having said that, there are other businesses that have had very prominent and profitable campaigns around LGBT inclusion, particularly around, think about hospitality, airlines, and then for those, you'll see the metric on return on investment be unique to the company. And so, there's hospitality companies we work with that have been tracking for years that their investment in LGBT micro-targeting has been, as compared to some other demographic groups, on the higher side. And so again, it depends on how the business is measuring that ROI, but I have not yet seen a business that said, actually, we don't see any noticeable difference here. Whether it's in terms of employee engagement and attitudes, or it's in terms of a more discrete effort, campaign, or product.
Okay, gracias.
La siguiente pregunta está de este lado, por favor, el micrófono.
Hi, Deena. This is Abraham. So, as you said, it's very difficult for the organizations to align in this kind of initiative, no? Because they, most of the time, shows a little bit of resistance because they like to balance the reputational risk between to have it or not have it, or to have this market or not. No? So, is there any tool or site or any information that you can recommend us to start to show this impact at a business level? Because as you said, no, normally companies ask why I have to do this, how much it will give me from return. Because sometimes they know that it's the right thing to do, but it's difficult to do if it's not accompanied with some budget or something like that.
It does, and I think probably the best counter-argument to a fear of reputational risk is right now we have such a critical mass of literally hundreds of multinationals that, whether at a basic level or at a very sophisticated developed level, have embraced LGBT inclusion. And that goes for oil and gas companies like Shell and Chevron and BP. It goes for food and beverage companies like General Mills, Kraft, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, and even unlikely companies like Alcoa. Alcoa, the aluminum manufacturer. You know, why are they investing in this? Because it's the right thing to do and it's right for their business. And so, right now, I would actually say that even behind closed doors, the individuals who express the concern around reputational risk are sometimes putting that forth as a bit of a, I don't know if this translates here, straw man argument. It's easy to tear up. It's not exactly reflective of the data, because if you look at how many businesses have embraced this and they continue to thrive, that to me is the strongest case against it. Having said that, occasionally there are these public relations issues. So for example, Target in the United States took a bold stand for transgender inclusion. Now, to be honest, their stance was not very different from many other similar companies. Walmart, for example, has transgender protections. And yet, because of the particular moment in the press, Target's efforts, became the story. And so, there are occasional outliers like that cause a little bit of, heartburn or headache in the communications team, but that's why they're there. So we have yet to see any sort of, certainly no profitability loss or significant reputational issue by embracing LGBT inclusion. And part of that also is that element of social change that I think I dismissed earlier, which is that more and more people do embrace LGBT inclusion, and more people know someone who's LGBT, have a relative who's LGBT, and so that has also shifted the idea that it's going to be us and them. It's going to be us as a corporation and them, those that don't want us to become inclusive, when in fact, among their ranks they'll have LGBT people.
Muchísimas gracias a Deena Fidas por esta conferencia, y le voy a pedir a Francisco Robledo que se me acompañe acá arriba para entregarle el reconocimiento a Deena por su participación en esta tarde. Por favor, adelante, Francisco.